All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Black Masculinity Reimagined, fighting for ourselves as we fight against the system. My name is Yolo. First of all, my name is Yolo Akili Robinson. I'm the executive director and founder of Beam, the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. And as with all things with Beam, we always like to start with a spirit of gratitude. So I want to express my gratitude to each of you for making the choice to spend time with us, to invest in this conversation and this dialogue. I want to thank you for trusting us to hold this really powerful and critical and also nuanced dialogue that we're going to have today. And also, I just want to go ahead and thanks in advance for what you want to share that will be that you'll offer for us in the conversation, because we see this as a learning opportunity for each of us. This is not a space where we're going to come and share as the experts that we are the only people who know these things. We recognize that everyone in this room has expertise, brilliance, and knowledge about their own experience that can help us all collectively grow. And so we're really excited to have this conversation and be in community with you all today. Um, to preface it, it is really important to note that police violence and brutality impacts every corner of Black communities, right? From people who are living with mental illness, people who are Black trans folks, Black trans women and men, to extensions of the police state that show up in ICE and the ways in which ICE continues to violate, denigrate, and destroy so many of our communities in this country, right? And so when we talk about police and the work we're doing today, we really join a chorus of organizations across the country, collectives, entities, when we say that we call for a defunding of the police and redirecting that money into care and to community services led by our folks that support our folks in wellness and being, and also creating collective safety. So I want to honor that and name that is the space you have entered into and how we ground ourselves in this conversation and this work. Next slide for me, please. Another important piece of our work today is to really name that whenever we come together in the work of healing and the work of wellness and liberation, we are a part of a lineage. You know, it's important to name that as Black folks, we have a history of resistance, a history of struggle and transformation, but we also have a history of healers. And so, in any space that we cultivate, we name and bring those folks in, that lineage of folks who are Black, queer, trans, men, women, non-binary folks from various different faith traditions, from various different modalities of healing and wellness, from herbalists to domestic workers to therapists to tarot readers. We bring them in and we name that space because we want that energy. We want to honor that energy and that capacity within each of us to be healers, to actually support healing in of our communities. And so I want to name that and frame that so that you know the space that we've entered into. We're calling in those folks who hold healing for us, and also inviting us to hold healing as well for ourselves in this space together. Next slide. We also want to begin to take a moment to really pause to just acknowledge the continuing violence against our communities by the police state. We want to name those who we lost. And as you see on the image right here, we have names of various different folks who we are no longer with us due to state violence. And there are many, many more. We want to uplift that, like, the folks listed here are not just Black cisgender men, which so often happens where the experiences of Black trans women, the experiences of Black women, of non-binary folks with the police state are erased, are minimized. We're naming that it is something that all of us experience in very different ways often. And so I want to hold that and just take a moment for us to pause to honor the folks whose lives who were not present with us due to state violence. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. All right, so I want to give you all some context for how we're going to be in our space today. My role really today before the panelists and start the conversation is to really ground the space that we're going to be in, to do something we call container building. Because we believe that a lot of times we try to jump into having very nuanced and difficult conversations without building a container, and that creates a lot of chaos. And so some of the work that I'm going to do is really just to help us have a little bit of refined structure, a little bit of grounding before we get this into this conversation. Understanding that difficulty will still come, understanding that challenge will still happen. But if we have a shared set of values, a shared set of agreements and understandings, those can help us really reroute ourselves when we get decentered, right? And so that is my work and my role today before I kind of introduce our esteemed guest who will really hold this conversation and provide the dialogue and the richness that you all will join in and be a part of as well. All right. So the first thing I want to invite folks to do is wherever you are, if you are seated, if you are standing, even if you are in motion, I want to invite you to take a moment to just really get some presence with your body. Now, let me be very clear about this. As I start this moment, I will make invitations. You can always rescind the invitation. I will make an invitation to invite you into a certain practice, maybe to breathe or do those pieces. You can be like, hey, I'm good. I actually don't want to do that. And I want you to honor whatever feels good for your body, your spirit, and your soul. These are invitations, right? Just want to name that and ground that before we begin. So the first invitation I want to extend is for you to find some comfort and rootedness in your body, whatever that looks like for you, right? And so for me, for example, I'm sitting in a chair. And so can we make sure everybody's muted, please? Um, so for me, what that rootedness looks like is one thing I do is I try to sit my chair back to my chair, right? And lower my shoulders, right? For me as well, one of those things it looks like for me is placing my feet flat on the ground, if that's something you can do. Once again, I want you to do whatever helps you in your body with its own unique abilities and capabilities and strengths to feel rooted and grounded, whatever that is. All right. So for me, I'm sitting, I have my feet flat on the ground, my shoulders low, making sure I'm not hunched up. And then I'm going to invite you, if you would like to, take a moment to place your palm, your hand on the center of your chest. And if you'd like to, you can close your eyes or you can keep them open, whatever feels good for you. But I want to invite you to take some time to bring your presence to your breath or just to your presence. So many times in our lives, in the Zoom world and just our lives in general, we're moving, shifting, organizing, and sometimes we're not taking the time to be present with our bodies. So this is an invitation to take some time to feel your chest rise and fall. Feel the weight of yourself, your presence, and just be with that. And if you would like, I invite you to bring your awareness to different parts of your body. Maybe you begin to pay attention to your feet and your kneecaps. What do you feel there? Maybe you don't feel nothing or you feel tingling. Whatever you feel, honoring it and accepting it as what is in the moment. You can also bring your attention to your belly or to your chest and your shoulders. Just acknowledging what you feel, what's there, the tenseness, the softness, the suppleness, whatever is present, honoring that. And now, with your presence in your consciousness, just aware of you present here in your body, and the body that so many of our folks have fought for and are still fighting for us to have the right to be in, to live in dignity. I want you to feel that presence and just honor this moment, because there will never be another moment like this. Honor the moment that you are here. And if you like, you can join me in wrapping your arms around yourself, kind of as if you're giving yourself a hug. And I want to encourage you just to take a moment just to hold yourself. So often we are holding so many, holding space for everyone and not always taking time to hold ourselves, to hold space for our feelings, our concerns, our needs. And so I want to invite you just to take a moment to hold yourself. Maybe you rub your arms as you hold yourself, if that feels good for you. Holding yourself, this moment, your body, your feelings, your presence, holding it as sacred, holding it as valid, holding it as real, just holding yourself. And as you hold yourself in this moment, I want to encourage you throughout our course of our time together today to continue to hold yourself in tenderness, to continue to hold yourself in awareness, to practice it, to fail at it and come back at it when you need to. But I just want to encourage you to remember that you need to be held as well, and that your presence in your body is an important part of who you are. And if you'd like to, you can let your arms fall. Maybe you do a little bit of stretches, maybe a little bit of chair twerking, depending on where you're at, side to side. For those who joined us in that moment, thank you for trusting and engaging in that process. And if you just sat and watched, thank you for also being present. I hope you found anything you found out useful out of that. I want to honor and hold. Thank you for joining for that piece. All right. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm a big believer of nothing without intention. Why are we here? What are you here for? What have you come to this space to do, to see, to be a part of? And so what I'm going to invite everyone in this space to do is in the chat box. And for those of you who are new to Zoom, on the bottom bar, you'll see a little box that says chat. And so I want to invite you to click that. And what we're going to do is share what our intention is for us to be together. Because when we have an intention on our heart and on our chest, it helps guide us and redirect us and recenter us when we lose our path and our way. So I'll start with sharing my intention, and I would love to offer some of the panelists, some of you who haven't met yet, so to share a little bit about maybe what your intention is as well. So my intention today is to hold heart space. When I say what holding heart space is, to me, heart space is holding tenderness for us, helping us practice tenderness when we weren't taught that with ourselves, with our emotional selves, helping us really be able to hold the nuances of the hard things and the difficult things. That's my intention today and what I want to hold. And so I want to invite people to please type into the chat box, what is your intention? Why are you here? What is your purpose today? And I'll read out a few, and then we'll ground this piece in this part of the beginning. Okay. All right, so I see people typing in. So first one I see from Nally. Nally says, my intention is to listen and hold heart space and support. Ashe, thank you for sharing, Nally. Merrick says that my intention is to listen. Chelsea says, my intention is to be present and engaged by listening to what those on the panel chat, share, and provide space for that. Amy says, my intention is to understand more and judge less. Ashe, firmly knows. Bonnie says, my intention is to hold space for the brothers that are willing to share, to listen, and to nurture empathy. Ashe. John says, my intention is to connect with the healing power of our community to address our own issues and address our own wounds in a way that is authentic to our diverse but intertwined experiences. Ashe. Nia says, my intention is to learn how to be an advocate for my brothers. Rita, and please, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please feel free to chat and let me know. I take names very seriously. So Rita, if I'm saying that correctly, says, I am here to support others and listen without judgment. Tina says, my intention is to make myself available to learn and grow. Alexander says to support and build a collaborative community. Ashe, ashe. I'll take one or two more. Gordon says, my intention is to connect and listen. And Natasha says, to learn how to better support brothers in this work. Ashe. So I want to hold up and lift up some of the themes. I hear a lot of supporting, a lot of listening, a lot of learning, to connect, to help, to be in collaboration, to nurture empathy. Those were a lot of the themes that we brought into the space, people named. Feel free to keep sharing your intentions, but I want to hold and invite you to hold your intention right here at your heart, the same place where I invited you to hold your hand as we were breathing in our grounding practice. I want to encourage you and invite you to hold that intention to remember why you're here and also to honor and remember what you have to offer, which is many of the things that you've shared as well, right? So thank you everyone for participating in that first part of our grounding exercise, all right? We'll go to the next slide, please. So briefly, I want to talk about Black Masculinity, Black Masculinity Reimagined. It's a mouthful. So Black Masculinity Reimagined is a community building initiative, right, that addresses the intersection of male socialization, mental health, and community violence. These are the objectives we have of this work. It's to identify and apply skills, give us tools and strategies to disrupt toxic masculinity in all the ways in which it shows up in our lives, whether it's in male privilege, and it shows up in our mental health, as well as in sexual and domestic violence. We also want to model and produce behaviors and also fail at those behaviors and teach failure in ways that help promote masculine supportive expressions of gender, masculine supportive expressions, excuse me, and affirm the dignity of trans and queer communities and support the full emotional humanity of men and masculine folks. And then, of course, we work to build accountable communities and networks with men and masculine folks that reinforce anti-sexist, anti-transphobic, and anti-patriarchal beliefs and behaviors. So that's a little bit about us. We have workshops consistently. Who I'm going to introduce later will tell you more about Black Masculinity Reimagined. But that's a little bit about the work that we're doing and what you're joining us in today. This work is supported by the New York Women's Foundation, the Blue Shield Foundation of California, and the Women's Foundation of California. Much gratitude and thanks for their continued support of these efforts. All right. And now some more container building pieces. So one, today when we speak, because you will be invited to speak, it will not just be me or the panelists talking. We want to invite you to share your name. You can also share your pronouns. It's also helpful, so make sure people do not misgender you. We want to honor that space. So for example, my pronouns are he, him, and his. So we want to encourage folks when they're speaking to share as well. Next slide. Just in case you did not know, sometimes people come into Black Masculinity Reimagined and they assume that Black masculinity means only Black cisgender men. I want to be very clear that like the space that we are holding, the space that we are inviting you into to join us, is a space making room for all Black folks who identify as masculine. So that includes masculine women, non-binary folks, it includes gay and straight men. We are interested in supporting and enriching and cultivating space for all Black life, all Black folks, right? And so this is the space you have entered into. Any time in which there is a moment when we may get away from that, myself, as well as the other folks who are the moderators of this conversation, will compassionately redirect you to understanding the necessity of us interrogating and addressing transphobia, homophobia, ableism, and all these other some forms of oppression in terms of how we construct space for Black folks. So I want to invite you to sit with the discomfort if there's discomfort in that. But I want to invite you to know that there's an opportunity for growth and learning and connection with so many of your brothers, sisters, friends, colleagues in our communities when you sit with and learn through that discomfort. This goes back to the same piece I just said, allies. Also to white allies, I think it's important to say too. The same thing, this is a place that centers Black experiences, Black lives. And when, like, once again, as you can see on that image, we also understand Blackness to mean a lot more things than just African-American. Blackness is also, there are Afro-Latinx, Afro-Caribbean folks, African folks. We hold that space. We want to name that. And we also want to know to white folks and non-Black people who are in the space, you are more than welcome to be here. But once again, this is not a space that will center your experience. And any attempts to decentralize Blackness will be compassionately redirected into the core of what our purpose and intention is today. So our purpose today is to discuss experiences with the legal system and its impact on our mental health, our communities. We want to share some best practices. This is a part where we're going to be collectively sharing, right? So that means that the panelists have a lot of expertise and knowledge, and you also have this expertise and knowledge, and you'll share with us and teach us, and we'll grow together. And then we're going to collectively think about imagining a world free of police brutality and how we can best support ourselves and our community in healing from the harm of the police state, even as it is ongoing, even as we fight to transform this country and the systems that we are currently having to navigate. How do we still envision healing? What is our most radical and beautiful and powerful vision for the world and for our folks. And so that is the work that we'll be doing together today. Right. As I shared earlier, our agenda, container building and feelings wheel. I'm almost done with the container building. Now you're probably like, is this person going to stop talking? I promise you. And then I'm going to open it up and introduce the panelists for discussion. And afterwards, we'll have about 30 minutes for an open mic for this conversation, questions, comments, etc. So we once again want to have a really robust dialogue and conversation today. All right. Slide. All right, so here comes to the stuff. I know you're like, Loa, we got shared understandings, and yes, we do, because we understand that if we don't have those things, sometimes we step into space in ways that maybe we need to, we don't always have the reminder. So this is just as a reminder. I'm going to go through it briefly because I want to make sure we get to the meat of our conversation, okay? So the first piece is I want to invite us to take space and make space. That means be mindful of how much space we take up. Be mindful of how much space we don't take up. Right? Sometimes as people who as men are masculine folks, we live in a world that tells us we get to take the right to take up space and talk as much as we want to and need. There's no policing, for lack of a better term. There's no conversation around like you maybe be mindful of how much space you're taking up. And so a part of our work today is to really think about how much space am I taking up? And do I need to show up more, or am I not showing up enough? Thinking about that. Which goes to the second one, wait, why am I talking? Or why aren't I talking? Sometimes we talk and we're just talking because we're anxious. Sometimes we're talking because we feel challenged. Sometimes we're talking because of a variety of different reasons, right? So once again, cultivating that self-reflexivity, why am I talking? Is there an opportunity to listen? Am I talking to provide conversation? Am I talking to dominate? Am I talking to understand? What does that look like for me? We use the space of brave space, so we don't believe necessarily in a safe space, but there are things we can do to increase the safety of space, and some of that is what we're doing now. And by increasing the safety of the space, we do shared understandings, we ground and we root ourselves, we name our lineages, and we also make sure that we're clear about what our purpose is here today, right? So I want to invite you to join us in collaboratively creating safer spaces. Using I statements, speaking for ourselves, not speaking for all Black people, Black men, Black women, Black whoever, which is often a common tactic and strategy we use to avoid the vulnerability of naming our own experience. So I want to invite us to speak for ourselves. And last but not least, be mindful of our boundaries. Be mindful of your own internal boundaries. Sometimes we will share things that we are not prepared to share or disclose, and we may activate our own selves when we weren't ready, right? Sometimes we may not honor the boundaries of other folks, right? So I want you to be mindful of your boundaries and the boundaries that people in this space establish for themselves, whether it is their pronouns, whether it is a dialogue they don't want to engage in. I want to encourage you to be mindful of boundaries for us today, all right? Those are our shared understandings. I'm going to pause for a moment for feedback, but I want to go through these first. Go to the next one. I'll go with our core assumption first.
Core assumption?
Yeah, yes, please. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Core assumptions of being, these are the core assumptions that Leroy and I, and as well, will invite you to join us in to make sure this is where we're coming from. The first one is we believe that everyone present has eminent value. Eminent means inherent. It means that we are not assigning worth to people based off the body, their productivity, that they are this particular gender or this race, that we are working vigilantly to show up and model for ourselves and each other what it means to show up and honor the inherent worthiness and value of everyone in this space. And so if that is our guiding factor, how do we show up differently? How do we talk to each other? How do we disagree? And that's what we want to encourage us to move into. The second one is we address behaviors, ideas, and choices we want to encourage you to do. There's a difference between saying the core of someone versus saying someone behavior, ideas, and choices. You might come to me and say, Yolo, that you are sexist. And if somebody hears that often, what many of us as Black folks hear is I am wrong. And we live in a culture that teaches us constantly that we are wrong. And as June Jordan, a Black lesbian feminist poet says, wrong is not my name, right? And so what we want to encourage instead is saying, Yolo, your behavior is sexist. Those ideas you presented are transphobic. Your choices reflect racism or are racist, right? Giving ourselves the grace to opportunity to reflect on our behaviors, ideas, and choices, knowing that we are not them, but we are responsible for their impact out in the world, right? But I believe that who I am, speaking for myself, I am spirit. So that is more than my behaviors, ideas, and choices. However, it does not absolve me from the responsibility of how they land. Number 3 is everyone has learned isms and privilege. We do not ask the question in our spaces, are you racist, transphobic, or homophobic? We feel like that is not a useful question. It often spirals communities unnecessarily. The more useful question we have found for our spaces is, where's the transphobia, the homophobia, the ableism, the sexism that you learned all your life as a person in this culture, in a society, showing up in your behaviors, ideas, and choices? We're not asking if it's there anymore. None of us are exempt. Our social justice politics, our morals do not make us exempt from being able to embody some of the most insidious and dangerous aspects of oppression. And so I will invite you all with curiosity to do the same. Where is the transphobia you learned showing up in your behavior, ideas, and choices? Where is the idea, the rooted in oppression that says that certain lives are not as valuable or worthy as yours or someone else's? Last but not least, our feelings are valid even if the ideas informing them are inaccurate. Goes into our last piece, which I'll go into. A feeling is often, in many languages, one word. I am sad, I am scared, I am frustrated. Many times we have been taught that a feeling is a belief or a narrative or a story. The story I tell myself might be completely inaccurate. I might say to myself, you are not a good person because so-and-so didn't do this for you, yada, yada, yada. That's a story. The feeling might be sadness. The feeling might be despair. The feeling is legitimate and valid always, even though the story may be inaccurate or not fully round, right? It may be missing pieces. So how do we hold the feeling, give it space to process and move through our bodies, and at the same time honor that maybe our stories, the grand mythologies we tell ourselves in our heads, because we all have them, may not be the full representation of what's happening, but something that's serving us in some other way. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Those are our core assumptions and our shared understandings. I want to invite people in the chat box. Any reactions, thoughts, feelings, or rebellions? You might be like, YOLO, nah, homie. I'm not feeling the feelings valid. You're doing a lot. What you doing? I want to honor that piece, but I want to hear from folks just general reactions to make sure you're checking in with yourself in terms of what's coming up for you as we move into the last part of our container building. All right, I'll give you a second just to let people chat. Reflections, reactions, rebellions. You know, we love a coup. We do love a coup. Sometimes it's necessary. All right. All right. I see a lot of responses. See one person said, Adam says, taking time to build a container and set intentions is vital in such healing spaces. Thank you for sharing that, Adam. And Bonnie says, I'm good. Thanks for the container explanations. All right. Vance says, quick reflection. Nia says, I appreciate the section on addressing behaviors, ideas, and choices. Jameer says, I like how you highlighted how everyone has learned isms and privilege. Ashe. So thank you all so much for that reaction and reflections. I'm going to go into our last piece, and then you're going to be done with me, and you're going to be like, oh, thank God, he's done. He's doing a lot right now. The last piece that's critical for us to begin our work today is the feelings wheel. So for folks who are not familiar with the feelings wheel, it is a tool that we use to cultivate healing and wellness spaces in our communities, but also to reconnect us with our emotionality, right? So if you look at this tool, in the center of the wheel, you see the words mad, sad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. And they're all color-coded. As you look at the wheel, as it radiates outward, there are different ways or different nuances of expressing those core feelings, right? So if we look at the section that says scared, we see confused, rejected, discouraged, insignificant, different iterations or nuance of that core feeling, right? This is why the feelings wheel is important. For us as Black folks, sometimes as masculine folks, as men, but Black folks broadly, we have often been gaslit out of our feelings and told our feelings are not valuable and useful. We have been taught that our feelings are not forms of knowledge that are legitimate, that our despair is not legitimate. We have not only been taught this by other people outside of ourselves, but we have taught this to ourselves and to the people that we love. And so we introduce this tool as an opportunity for reclamation, to honor and acknowledge that our feelings are valuable and powerful tools that can guide us towards ourselves, but also on a journey of our lives, right? And so a feeling, like I said earlier, is often one word. It's like, I feel bewildered, discouraged. Naming the feeling and where we feel it in our bodies can help us begin the process of cultivating self-awareness, right? So for me, I feel anxious, I often feel anxiety in my side of my body. That's a message. Your body is always sending you messages about what's going on within and around you, but we're not always listening. A part of our practice today in our grounding was to help us cultivate more listening to our bodies, because as Black folks, as people who are survivors of police violence, we are often disembodied. We are pushed out of our bodies. We are pushed out of it so that our bodies are not our own. And so this is a general practice and opportunity for us to begin the place of, what do I feel in my body, and what am I feeling, right? A couple of pieces I want to name to add on to this. As masculine folks and men folks, we are often encouraged to emotionally sever ourselves very early on to repress it for a limited emotional range. What ends up happening is that the frustrations we experience at the hands of police, state violence, and all these other pieces are often repressed and shut down and contribute to anxiety and depression, because we don't feel like we have the capacity, or we are not taught that we can express those very complicated and nuanced feelings often, right? And so we introduce this tool as a way for us to begin the conversation about going on the journey of, what am I feeling? Sometimes we don't know what we're feeling, and that too is information. It's all information. It's not good or bad. I do not believe in shouldn't on your feelings. I also don't believe in trying to control your feelings. You can't control your feelings as far as I'm concerned. What you can do is pay attention to your feeling and manage your behaviors in relationship to your feelings. I can be angry all day. My anger is not the problem. But if I'm starting going around punching walls and hitting people, that might be the problem. It's the behavior, not the feeling, right? What you repress will return. When you don't attend to our emotional selves, we don't make space for it, which a lot of us don't, because we haven't been taught that. It shows up in other places in our lives. It shows up in our bodies with somatic responses that we can't necessarily connect to a medical explanation, right? And so naming those pieces is really critical. And so with this feelings wheel, we introduce this as an easy, simple tool to be like, on your journey, think about, what am I feeling? What is it trying to tell me about my life? And where do I feel it in my body? What is the message? And we want to center that, and we offer that as a tool. Last piece I'll say, probably heard me say this a lot. Once again, my grandmother says, whatever you bury in the backyard will show up on the front porch one day. When you bury and you repress your feelings, they show up on the front porch at the most inconvenient time. You know what I mean? And so sometimes we try to be proactive about, let me address this, as opposed to running away from it, because it will find you. So thinking about that piece with the feelings, honoring this is a new muscle for some of us. I don't know about y'all. I didn't grow up. My daddy wasn't like, look at the feelings wheel. That's not a life I lived. I don't know if y'all was about that life. I had to learn this. The first time I saw this, I was like, okay, I don't know what I feel. I want to honor wherever we are in our journey. But what I'd like to invite us to do as our last practice before I introduce the panel is to type in the chat box, if you like, what you're feeling right now and what you're feeling in your body. Understand that there's no bad feeling, no not good feeling. There's only information. And if you don't feel comfortable writing in a chat box, that's good. I would invite you to remind it to yourself. Just check to yourself, like, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling this in my shoulders. I'm feeling this in my neck, And so we're going to invite you to share. For those who share, I'm going to read a couple of them. And then I promise you I won't bother you anymore for this grounding.
And Yolo, being mindful of time, if we could just share about 2 or 3.
Cool. Sounds good. Dr. Lipscomb says, I'm feeling happiness in my chest. That's right. Vance says, the time it takes for you to create space is the time it takes for you to create space. I'm a little rebelliously that you didn't over-explain your setting the space like you're bothering us. You can share this publicly. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I read that out loud. So, but thank you for that feedback. Yes, you're right. We do need to take time and space to hold space, because it helps us have a fruitful conversation. So I appreciate you honoring that and letting me know that I was not bothering you all. I appreciate that. Bonnie says, I'm feeling anxiety on my skin and I never noticed where it showed up before. Sure. So affirming. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right. I think those were my 3. Yeah. Thank you for those who shared. For those folks who did not share, I want to encourage you to share with yourself if you can, if you're open to. If you don't want to share with yourself, all about consent-based practice, don't do it. Okay, until you feel good about it.
Mm-hmm.
The Feelings Wheel as a tool will be something that will be emailed to all participants. It's also available on our toolkits page, as well as a lot of other resources. It's a simple thing that you can do every single day to begin to reflect, check in, and see what's going on with your life and where your feelings are guiding you, but also teaching and showing you. Right? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. Oh,
Awesome.
managing comfort. I forgot. So last piece I'll say about managing comfort. Once again, I said this earlier. If you feel uncomfortable, we want to invite you to be present with what that discomfort is. What is it telling you? What do you need to take care of yourself? Throughout our time together, please feel free to, if you need to get up, get a drink of water, if you need to walk off, if you need to like cut it off because it's just a little bit too overwhelming for you. I want you to honor whatever feels good for you. That is a part of our consent-based practice. And last one, I think, last slide should be, I'm going to introduce Leroy. Yay! Okay, so now, even though I'm not bothering you, I'm going to introduce Leroy Mitchell, our masculinity and mental health trainer. Leroy is the brain behind Black Masculinity Reimagined. He is the artist that creates all the amazing graphics that we have. He is the artist who creates the lesson plans, the curriculum, the visioning. He is really the vehicle behind it. And while there are many people who join him in that, he really drives the car and we just jump in from time to time. So I want to lift that up and lift up Leroy. He's brilliant. He has experience working with our kids, Black and brown kids, particularly Black and brown men most recently, and as a college counselor, supporting young people who are navigating the school system, both college and undergrad, and also high schools. And he also has a very, very big heart and a really commitment to the wellness of our communities. So without further ado, Mr. Leroy Mitchell.
Wow, Yolo, thank you. Yolo is like the best hype man, hype person. If I ever go on tour, Yolo's gonna be right there. So thank you, Yolo. You are too kind. First off, thank you again, Yolo. Thank you for building that container. Thank you for making this space safer and building space for us to share as we engage in this topic. Check in my pronouns he, him, his. I'm feeling really excited for the folks, experts in their very own right, with this topic and doing work and creating healing within the community. So let's meet these amazing gentlemen that will be speaking on our panel today. We're going to engage very fruitful conversation, and then we'll give everyone space, as Yolo said, time to ask your questions, give your perspective. Everyone here has a valuable perspective. The answers are in this call, in this room. So we're just looking forward to hearing them all. So first, Dr. Lipscomb, welcome. Welcome, Dr. Lipscomb. If you could say your pronouns, where you're from, where you represent, what you're holding down, your work, the work that you currently do, and what your intentions are for the day.
For sure. Alan Lipscomb, pronouns he, him, his. I am from Los Angeles County, grew up in the San Fernando Valley area. My work is centered around understanding in an intimate way Black male grief and trauma and what that looks like in order to support healing among Black men who experience various forms of trauma. My intentions for today is to share my experience as a clinician, as a scholar, as a researcher, as a Black male, to bring about affirmation to other Black men, to name what maybe some Black men could not name or identify or validate. That is my intention. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful intention. Next, Mannie Thomas III. Put some respect on the third, for sure. Mannie, please share.
Yeah, as you said, my name is Mannie Thomas III. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm from a little city called Corona, California. In terms of my work, I'm the growth coordinator for Success Stories. Success Stories program is an alternative to prisons that builds safer community by offering feminist workshops to people who have caused harm. We do that in a multitude of ways. We do it inside of prisons, juvenile halls, youth programs, transitional housing, schools. And we think it's important that, you know, we create a space where men can heal and to discover a new way of thinking, to get outside of this patriarchal norm. And my intention today is simply to just one, bring awareness and to influence any type of healing that I can. I think I mentioned earlier, for so long I suffered from something that I didn't realize I was suffering from, and didn't find out too much later on in my life, and it presented itself in certain ways. So if we can catch that early and somebody can like maybe relate to my story in some way and begin the healing process themselves, that's my intention. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So powerful. So glad that you're here, man. And last but not least, Richie, coming to the stage. Please, Richie, what up?
What's up, everybody? My name is Richie Reseda. I use pronouns he, him, and his. Also from LA, city of LA, specifically San Fernando Valley. And my work surrounds creating things that seek to abolish patriarchy in prisons. Another way of saying that is creating things that free people. I work with success stories with Mannie, and very honored to do that work as well. My intention for today is to really bring light to the connection between our mental health and our wellness, specifically as Black people, and abolitionist struggle, and how those things are really connected.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Richie. Again, so powerful. And we're so glad that you three are on this call. So what we're going to do now, we're going to hop into some questions. Due to time, you know, I'm going to ask somebody to share and lead. And then after, you know, if you could make your response concise, then we'll build upon that. And we'll just see where we're feeling, see where we're going. And especially with these questions, really being mindful and tapping into what was the feeling, you know, what is the feeling? Practicing that emotional awareness, that emotional muscle that we all have. So again, thank you all for being here. Super honored. So I'm just gonna open this up. Maybe Dr. Lipscomb, you can start, and then we can just go Dr. Lipscomb, Mannie, and then Richie. But what are your personal experiences, if any, with police, the legal system as a whole, and how did they make you feel?
Sure. And so my experience with police happened when I was 13 years old. And the felt experience at that time was afraid and confused. Because when I had found out why I was arrested, why they put me over, et cetera, I knew it wasn't me, right? I knew that they had the wrong person, but they didn't. And so feeling afraid and confused simultaneously was that initial experience with police.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. People sharing that. Yeah, man.
So my personal experience with law enforcement has always been adversarial. There's never been a time in my life where I can think of where the police showed up and I felt safer or okay. Like now I knew things were gonna be okay. I think that what always like, I didn't always realize the harm that it created for me. We'll talk more about that later. But what's always apparent is when you stood on some type of right that you had, how they became more belligerent. So it was like, when I demand that you treat me in a certain way, that all human beings should be treated, somehow you're more upset. And that was always apparent to me. So that has been my relationship with officers. I have a long history, like I said, starting in school and then, you know, eventually when I was incarcerated. So that has always been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. And Richie.
Yeah, my experiences are similar to my brothers on the panel. I've never had a positive experience with a law enforcement officer in my entire life, um, whether that be police or district attorneys or anybody in law enforcement. My earliest experience with the police, I was 4 years old. A police officer came to my preschool to do a um, like presentation on not getting kidnapped, and then he left and like came back in a disguise, and it was clearly him, and he invited me to come to his car and said he would give me candy if I went to his car, and I did because I knew it was the person who was just there. And my mom worked at the school, and all the, I got in the car with him and he drove around the block and he gave me a piece of candy and brought me back and then took off his disguise and was like, gotcha, I just told you not to go with strangers. And I was like, you're the cop who was just here. You're not a stranger. I don't, it just seems, anyway, and all my mom's staff kind of got on her, and it was like the big joke that Richie went with the cop. And I think it was really a metaphor for just how my relationship would be with the police when I started getting arrested at 11 years old in Los Angeles schools. It was all about the gotcha. It was about what can we prove? What can we get on you? How can we justify some kind of punishment or dehumanization as opposed to being in service of me? And I was always seen as a threat. And the way that it made me feel was distrustful of them and also distrustful of myself. If everybody thought I was such a threat, then maybe I was. And I actually began to really hate everyone. And I used to literally chant the words F everybody when I was like a teenager, because I thought if these people represent society and this is how they treat me, then society is anti-me, and therefore I should be anti-society.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. With everyone who just shared, it seems like our encounters with police happen at an early age. I mean, Richie, you were 4 years old. And so I'm curious, being exposed to the police and feeling anger, confusion, being bamboozled, being being tricked by police. As you navigated the world, as you grew up, were you able to name that? Were you able to hold those feelings, or even recognize them? And how did that show up? Rich, you kind of alluded to it, but even at an early age, how did that show up as you grew up? As a man, as socialized being a man. Like, how did that show up as you grew up?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think that interactions between law enforcement and Black masculine people are some of the earliest examples of gaslighting in our lives, because I knew from the time I was very young, from when I was getting kicked out of classrooms for talking when everyone else was talking, or like I said, the first time I was arrested, it was for playing too rough when I was 11 years old in the 7th grade. By the time I was 15, I had been arrested like 4 times and I had never actually broken the law. I knew that I was a target by police. It was obvious to me. And to have my family, even my Black family, my dad, who's with the ancestors now, and may peace be upon him, my dad was very conservative and would say, he's from the projects, and he would say, I've never been arrested and neither should you. And if you're getting in trouble with the police, then that's because you're doing something wrong. And he kind of grew up in the church, and in like, I'm not saying everybody in the church does this, but there is very much a culture within my family of like, we are Christian and therefore we look down on people we're not those kind of poor Black people, right? And yeah, it was like gaslighting. So anyway, to answer your question more specifically, what were the results of that, Leroy, for me, was me starting to understand that I was supposed to be a certain way. I don't know if I shared in my intro, but y'all know I was incarcerated for almost my entire adult life. I got out 2 years ago. I got incarcerated when I was 19 and got out when I was 26. The reason why I became a gang member, the reason why I got into drugs, the reason why I started doing all those things is because that's who society told me I was supposed to be. That's how the police treated me before I ever wanted to be like that. And who I really was, didn't fit into who society was telling me I was supposed to be. And that's not for me to not take responsibility for the robberies that I committed or the harm that I've done. But before I did anything wrong to anybody, I was first told this is who you were supposed to be. And that was directly linked to the way that law enforcement treated me.
Thank you. That's super powerful. Mannie, did you have anything to add on to that? Perhaps anything.
I think he said it perfectly well. In terms of like, again, it was always, they were clear that you were the adversary. Like, he spoke about, like, for me, a lot of my police involvement at a young age was in school, right? And they literally used to pull, actually, me and a cousin of mine out of school in handcuffs whenever they could. And they would always say they were like looking for drugs or whatever. But it was because, we were fortunate, we grew up in a house with both of our parents or whatever. So we, like, when school came around, we did the things that most kids did. Like, we went out, got all the fresh gear. You know what I mean? If there were some Jordans, like, if we had to get it from our uncle, whoever, like, we got it. So when we came to school, the message was, now I realize that that's too nice for you. So you must be doing something illegal in order to achieve it. And we're going to figure that out. Although they had nothing, like, there was no surface for that. They had never caught us with drugs. Neither one of us. Neither one of us had ever had drug possession or anything like that. So it was just the messaging that was being sent to everybody else that, one, this is too nice for them to have. They must be doing it in a legal way. And it was a message for us that, one, we will say what we want to without any valid reason. And two, you're basically at our whim, right? Like, whatever we say about you eventually will become true. So it's funny when you think about, like, when we think about oppressive systems and, like, how masculinity is defined in the social way, and then what their actual goal was to demasculate you, right? Like, that's what they were doing. Like, I don't care who you are, who you strive to be. I'm gonna break that now, right? And I think that was clear even at a young age. And then that causes, Richie talked about what that caused for him. I wasn't aware of it so much later. It causes so much damage because for what happens is when we begin to discuss these things and how we're feeling about it, people are then telling us that that's not real, right? So in Richie's sense, his was, his dad telling him, like, hey, well, if that's happening to you, you must be doing something wrong. And mine was a little bit different. I was never asked specifically, was I selling drugs? But I was still asking, like, well, what are you doing? Was I hanging around people who were selling drugs? Like, there was still some connection of, well, you had to have been doing something in order for them to even mistakenly get you in that pool of people, right? And it wasn't that. It was simply I was being identified, either because I had nice stuff or I was able to convey myself in a way that they just didn't approve of. And they were going to curb it right then and there, at 13, 14 years old.
Thank you. And so, I'm hearing the police, the encounters by police, the gaslighting, and one really shaped the identity and what we believe, who we are. Dr. Lipscomb, I'm curious to just understand, if you had any personal experiences with that. One, how police may have began to shape your identity, and then two, what from your experience, working with Black men and the grief associated, how does that identity begin to be formed? One, with their involvement with police, and then two, what are some of the feelings? What are some of the challenges that presents?
Yeah, so if I miss anything, just ask me the question that I don't get to.
For sure.
I think the initial answer to your question was my personal experience and what it did to me around my identity and development is it made me not trust myself in spaces. And I think that's something that Richie and Mannie was touching on. And what I mean by that more specifically, because my initial trauma and loss experience simultaneously was because I happened to look like someone who robbed the restaurant down the street from my house. I never wanted to look like someone again, right? And so my identity became wrestling with how do I ensure that I look different enough so that I don't ever be accused of, right, doing something that I did not do, not understanding the larger context of it, but how it impacted me individually in my psyche and how I moved. Needing verification and where I was at. So this is before you can check in, you know, on Facebook or whatever, on Instagram, where you're at. So I would keep receipts, right? I would just have bags of receipts, because receipts back in the day would have the time, the date that you were there. Because again, I needed to move in a way that can prove where I was at so that I did not get accused of doing anything. So it impacts how you move, how you understand yourself, how you see yourself, and how you see others who look like you as well. And then there was another part of your question.
Yeah, and so how does that? I mean, I think there's like so much extra that one has to do, you know, that you did, like keeping receipts. And then, you know, Richie talked about being gaslit and you know, so what kind of effect does that have, as you've seen, on mental health and the emotional health, and just Black boys growing up, and Black men in general?
So what happens is you begin to hold it in, right? Because you can't express it. Nobody names it. Nobody identifies it. And that was my experience. Nobody talked about it. Nobody knew how to name the emotional, psychological experience of it. So it stays with you. It wasn't until, you know, I was in my adulthood that I realized the emotional impact of what I had to hold on to, psychologically speaking and emotionally speaking. And going back to something that Richie and Mannie touched on, you didn't want to be seen as someone who was seen as a criminal or whatever, you know, whatever it may be. So there was a taboo piece around that. And so not telling my story or sharing my story with anyone was part of the coping. So you see other ways of coping and denying your emotive experience. And then I think Yolo said it so well, quoting his grandmother, about what you put away in the backyard is going to show up at the front door. And so these emotions that you did not address, it shows up in other relationships, in other spaces, right? And then it hits you. And that's the grief experience that was missed, that missed bereavement, right? We've been bereft of a bereavement experience as Black men who have been racialized and experienced with police. Like, I've never felt safe. Like, I never thought, like, okay, call police. Like, even growing up, that was never a go-to thing. And so I used to think everybody feared the police. It wasn't until I got into my 20s, I was like, oh, you don't worry about that? Like, that's not a thing? Again, not realizing, nobody talking about it, naming it and giving language to it, you don't understand that it's different.
Yeah, so one thing, you know, that I would like to, you know, really talk about and explore with that, you know, so how did that show up? Like, how did, you know, so as we began to be gaslit, as we began to cope, you know, began to grieve, like, how did that impact others? You know, how did that begin to impact others? How did that impact our loved ones? How did that impact ourselves in our actions? Like, how does that trauma, you know, impact the lives of Black women, Black folks, our community as a whole? Just wondering, you know, if anyone would like to start, how that conditioning, that trauma that you experienced early, impacted your actions and others, you know, your actions and how your actions impacted others later on?
I can start this off.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, and then also what I see in my work is you don't want to burden other people, right? And so you're not telling your mother, you're not telling your grandparents, whomever, because you don't want them to worry about you. You don't want them to stress over how you're moving and what you're doing, emotionally and psychologically speaking. And so it becomes that secret, right? That never gets expressed because you're also trying to take care of the other person in your family and in your community.
Yeah. Richie, Mannie, if you have any thoughts, love to hear how you've seen this grief, like this trauma, this culture, the gaslighting, like how that showed up and how that impacted others.
So I'm gonna be all the way real with you, right? Like, so because I didn't have a way to name it, because I wasn't aware of what was going on, because I wasn't educated in that way, right? Like, I dealt with fear the way most men dealt with like fear, right? Like the way the system teaches us, which was with aggression, right? Like I wasn't gonna allow you to see that weakness, that what I thought was a weak part of me, right? I wasn't gonna allow you to see that I didn't know what to do in that sense. I wasn't gonna allow you to see that I was hurting. I wasn't gonna allow that, right? So the way that transformed was I was being aggressive. And then when we talk about like how we are with one area of our lives and how it made like it transcend to other areas of our life, I may have been aggressive outside the home first, but then I was still aggressive even in, you know, my more interpersonal relationships, right? Because if there was somebody, say my mom, who was able to recognize what was happening in the community was affecting me personally, and she began to ask, now I'm cutting her off, right? Like it became this like, oh no, I don't have this for you. I don't know how to give that to you because it was never taught to me how to give that to you. So that ability to be vulnerable and allow myself somewhere to go with it and then heal, I didn't have it. So like it just started to create a whole bunch of other problems that weren't necessarily there in the beginning. So the trauma was just it was compounded by the fact that I didn't have anywhere to go with it and I didn't know how to name it. The not naming it and not having anybody to share that with, you know, because one of my personal beliefs is, you know, trauma is healed when we can expose it and share it. I mean, when we can share our experiences with people who are going through some of the same things, I would give ourselves the opportunity to heal. So not having that just created more harm.
Yeah, I much to Manny's point, there's a lot to be said for the way that we as men are socialized to be emotionless or to try to be emotionless, and how much of that is performance. And there's also something to be said about the way that the kind of trauma that we face at the hands of state violence and systemic oppression leads us to literally not even have access to our own emotions, just as a coping mechanism. And I'll talk about myself, like Yolo mentioned in the agreement. When I first went to prison, like the third prison I went to, which was a high security prison, it's extremely violent. I was 20 years old when I got there. I had 2 strikes. I was always thinking about if I was going to live or die. I was always thinking about if I was going to be involved in something that was going to get me a 3rd strike. I was terrified of showing any emotions. I was terrified, period. I had put so much distance between myself and my emotions that I don't remember like having them and pushing them down. I just don't even remember having them. They just weren't a part of my lived reality. Survival was my lived reality. And when I had a partner at the time, and she would come see me, and I was locked up 10 hours away from LA. So it was a trek. She had to drive through the mountains. She had to take on a series of other traumas that come with visiting someone in prison, let alone a prison that's that far and in that racist of a place. This is in Susanville, California, where they still use the N-word regularly on street corners, and it's seen as fine. And I remember her saying to me one time, like, what's going on with you? You're just like a robot. You're just like a wall. Like I drive 10 hours to come see you, and you can't even connect with me emotionally. Like, you just tell jokes, you just don't say anything at all. She's like, what's the point of me coming to see you? And she was coming from a lot of pain and trauma, and kind of like coming at me. That was my experience of like, like, what am I doing here? Like, it's like nothing. Like, I get nothing from you emotionally, right? And I remember it was so hard for me to switch from living in a place where my emotions were my enemy to being in a place where now I was expected to be emotionally available for somebody and emotionally supportive to somebody and empathetic and then for 4 hours or 6 hours, and then go right back to where I was and have to turn all empathy off or thinking that that's what I had to do in order to survive. And just what that did to me emotionally as a person was harm. And it led me to then harm her. And that did emotional harm to her as a Black woman, going through all of that on top of what the system has already put her through for her to even access me. But then me having another layer of inaccessibility that took years, that I would say to this day, that was in 2012, 8 years later, I'm still dealing with that. And so often the labor and the harm that's caused by our own emotional brokenness falls on to Black women and to feminine people in our lives and non-binary people in our lives who are socialized to be kind of like the emotional holders of our relationships. When we are emotionally broken, when we are emotionally detached from ourselves, that then extends into harm on them. That's how it's looked in my life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's so poignant that you say that, Richie, because, just hearing your perspective and then Mannie, you sharing, and Alan, it's like a lot of the responsibilities are placed upon the women in our life, or the people socialized as women and femme in our lives, and how extra expectations are placed upon them. And then, as well as that, like a lot of the anger, not being able to process or name the emotions, like a lot of times the anger and the violence is placed upon Black women, Black queer folks, non-binary folks, because of the patriarchy. I think looking at time, let's see, 5:12. First, I forgot to mention, I'm so sorry, we have ASL, we have American Sign Language Interpretation in the room. So I just have to stop right there. So sorry, everyone. We have Rodney and Paris. If you look for them and their picture, if you are in need of ASL, I'm so sorry. We didn't mention this earlier, but they are there. You can actually click on their picture and you can pin them so that you can see that. I'm so sorry we didn't mention it earlier. But that is an option for you. And then what I would like to do, we have about 3 minutes before we open it up to the panel or open it up for discussion. I want to talk about, Richie, how did you begin that process? Mannie, Dr. Lipscomb, start with you, Richie. How did you begin that process of naming or like checking in with yourself and building your emotional capacity to show up for your partner who would come to visit you? Like, what was that process of recognizing, processing that trauma, and then building the skills to show up differently?
Well, I was really blessed to have her, and I was really blessed to have a lot of dope feminist Black women and non-binary people in my life, friends in my life who kind of my journey back to myself was through a conversation in feminism. It was with the works of Bell Hooks, namely We Real Cool, on Black men and masculinity, that Bell Hooks read. I had read it before I got locked up, but reading it again while I was locked up really began a healing journey for me. It really helped me put everything into context. It was really but whether it be through Dr. Hooks or, you know, the loved ones that I had. Like, it was really through the leadership of Black women and non-binary people that had that emotional availability and had that and were able to hold me accountable in that and had that expectation of me and weren't just like, well, he's locked up and you know how men are, so I guess he's just gonna be like this forever. Like, no, I was they loved me enough to want that for me and to want that for them, emotional wholeness and healing. And yeah, it was really through the works of bell hooks that I first started coming to that, and then eventually starting Success Stories, where we were having that conversation with hundreds of incarcerated men, because it was freeing for me, and we felt like it would be freeing for others, and yeah, and that's what it was for me.
Gotcha. And Richie, I would like to, dive in a little deeper with you because, I said there was the women in your life, Dr. Hooks, all these brilliant feminists that impacted you. But, I think, it's very important to say that, like, it's not women's responsibility or feminine folks' responsibility to get us there, so, and I know feminist, feminine folk, like, they can want us to show up, as much as they can, like, they can love us as much, but it really takes ourselves to step up and take that accountability. So, like, what was it for you, Richie, that said, yes, I'm going to commit to this and I'm going to hold myself accountable to really get into to what Dr. Hooks is saying, to get into this thought? Like, what was it? What was that thing that helped you stay accountable, keep yourself accountable?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really appreciate you mentioning that, Leroy. No, it is not feminine people's responsibility to heal us. I would say rather it is masculine people's responsibility to follow their lead, and that they were socialized to not be the way there's patriarchy socializes all of us to do many harmful things, but they were not socialized to be emotionless the way that we were, and I think it's our responsibility to follow their lead. From that, I just wanted to be free, bro. Like, in my soul, I wanted to be free. And when I was 14, and my mentors, Patrice Cullors and Mark Anthony Johnson, were training me as an organizer, and Mark Anthony used to take me to feminist men's groups, and I could be there and like hug men and see men being like whole humans. That was the freest that I have ever felt around men at the time. So I requested those books when I got locked up. It's not like they were like, Richie, you have to go do this. Like, I requested those books, and I was blessed to have them around me, supporting me, because everybody doesn't have that inside. And we need to be that for folks inside. We need to be that for each other. But yes, I wanted to be free, and I was blessed enough to know what freedom looks like.
Damn. Powerful. Mannie, I'm curious to know, what was that aha moment for you? One, when did you recognize the trauma? Because I know you mentioned earlier, you didn't even know what was happening with you. So what really got you to, one, recognize it, two, begin to process it, and then three, begin to do the work for yourself?
Because I'm gonna be honest. So, like, a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I was 24 years old when a judge sentenced me to 32 years to life. Like, I knew in that moment something's got to change. Right? Like, I knew in that moment that I didn't want to be remembered for all the things that the court were saying about me. So it was time for me to change the narrative. So I knew that what I was doing wasn't working. And then I think the series of many, many years after that was find out, like, how did I get here? I think that was like when I was sitting in a level 4 and, you're looking at these concrete walls, you're like, how did I get here? And I think the long story short is I realized that I was wearing a mask. And the longer that I wore that mask, like, the more toxic my life became. So when I found myself trying to honor that idea of, you know, being emotionless or not having feelings or whatever, like I was able to do things that will put me in that situation. So when I gave myself permission to one, acknowledge that some of the things that I had experienced in my life were real and had happened to me, and it provided an opportunity for me to heal through connection, art, and like being a part of the movement. And then it was really, I like, as Richie said, I mean, I hate, you know, Richie was, you know, monumental in like my, what I like to say, like my social change. Like I had figured out intellectually how I couldn't be anymore. But that didn't mean that I had freed myself in the way that says, okay, well, express yourself in this way and encourage other people to express themselves in this way. So, when I had got to the point where I understood rightly what being a part of a patriarchal society meant, like, so when I first learned about patriarchy, I thought it was one of those times I was gonna have to like apologize for being a male and my manhood, quote unquote, not realizing that it was a whole system that was being played out. So when I realized,
Manny, also, could you like just like 2 seconds define patriarchy for those who may not know?
so
Just really quick.
this is the best way I can do it. So toxic masculinity, when we engage ourselves in toxic masculinity, so this idea that, you know, that men get their value from either earning the most money, be willing to objectify women, who's willing to be the most violent, or you know, have that emotional side to them. When we and ourselves are acting that out individually, that's toxic masculinity, right? When society as a whole is promoting those behaviors in our men, that's patriarchy, right? So
Gotcha.
I had given myself into that, right? And when we think about like, so when we think about like why patriarchy, it's important to remember like why patriarchy in and of itself exists, right? So rich white men are really the founders of patriarchy, right? And then what they did is they designed systems to protect the privilege that patriarchy give them. Our legal system is no different, which is why it's not a coincidence that people of color are never getting the benefit of the doubt, why we get longer sentences, right? Because patriarchy teaches that domination comes in the form of power, which is why we have a whole legal system that seeks to achieve justice by dominating people instead of healing them or resolving any type of issue, right? So when we think about like, here was a kid who had suffered some type of harm, here it is, we're just gonna give him 32 years to life and it's over with, right? Like they weren't really ever concerned about any type of healing for my victim society or me, right? They just wanted to just hear, because that's what patriarchy teaches. And our legal system is just an extension of that. So when I became aware of the system that I was being a part of and how that was playing out in my own life, I then found ways to get back to my natural self, right? To become emotionally one person, to then not acting out in those ways, which allowed me to love differently, which allowed me to see people differently, which improved my relationships. It still does to this day, which allowed me to break down barriers. And more than anything else, it allowed me to be human again, right? So when we talk about the idea of when you guys looked at the wheel and the feelings, right? For most men, the only feeling that they would have been able to identify on that was anger, right? Because that was one of the things that socially it only becomes acceptable for us to show. Because if I tell you as a man that I'm sad, right, I'm somehow weak. If I tell you I'm feeling vulnerable in some type of way, or if I'm just sharing my feelings, it's like, man, like get out of here, right? So we begin to not do that. It's just like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that no more because I don't want to be seen in that way. And the day that I started giving myself the permission to feel and to deal with those feelings in healthy ways, really just transformed who I was as an individual, and it transformed everything it is about my life. So,
yeah, amazing. Thank you, Manny. Dr. Lipscomb. So I have a question. Richie talked about, for him, it was wanting to feel free or feel liberated. You know, for Manny, he talked about giving him permission to feel, and understanding the systems that were affecting him and impacting him and wanting to be emotionally whole. Can you talk about other strategies that you have seen and other ways folks can begin to intervene in their own trauma, process it, heal from it, and then prevent it from impacting themselves and others that you have seen be successful?
Yeah, first I just want to acknowledge Mannie and Richie for sharing and being so vulnerable today. I so appreciate that and honored to be on the panel with you. I think one of the things, and you heard this with Mannie and Richie, is recognizing that something's not right, that I'm not okay, whatever that means. And then the other piece is being able to come to a place and space where you're ready to address it and do something about it. And I think the onus is on us as community, as community folk, to honor how folks go about reconnecting with self, healing, connecting with their emotions as well, and really pacing it, clinically speaking, for those who are clinicians in the space, slowing it down when you are holding space with Black men who are coming to this. One of the things that I have found to be really helpful is sitting with silence in the space and honoring where they're at. Because far too often with men, Black masculine men, it gets hijacked. It gets shortened. It gets truncated by other folks who don't know how to sit in the space to allow Black men to feel and grieve. Part of the journey, and like Richie said, returning to self, part of the journey and process is being able to sit in that emptiness space with self. And all of that what all that brings to you, right? That sadness, that joy, that anger, that frustration. It is not an irony that in clinical spaces and healing spaces that I facilitate, Black men are the first to cry in the space. And it's usually in that first session because what they have been holding on to for so long. And that's the grief piece. That's the loss piece that I was touching on earlier. So how we honor it, how we give space for it without decentering their emotive experience. Sometimes we invite other people's narratives into the space and it takes away from their grief experience, right? We're like, well, what about, and what about, boom. And it doesn't mean that. And I think also folks try to throw in other things around, like, well, they need to be accountable. Well, they need to be more responsible. And it's like, wait, hold on. Can they just grieve? Can they just connect with their emotions? Like, and it's not to say that there shouldn't be accountability, but right now in this space, we need to honor the emotive experience. We don't know how to sit with it. We don't know how to allow and see Black men be vulnerable and emotional. It creates discomfort for folks. And so a lot of the work becomes how we honor that. I call it honoring-based practice with Black men, how we honor where they're at and how we support that in their experiences.
Man, it's funny because Dr. Lipscomb, when we're talking about this, me, Dr. Lipscomb, Richie, Mannie, Yolo, we were talking about this before, like last week, and Dr. Lipscomb was like, we're going to need a part 2, right?
That part.
We need a part 2.
That part.
So, I mean, we got through, 2-3 questions. So, I thank you all for sharing what you did right now. In the, thinking about time, I want to open up the space for others. Definitely want to open up the space for others to share. So what we're going to do right now is Yolo is going to come in and lead us through like a 1-2 minute check-in, because I'm sure a lot was activated with this conversation, this fruitful conversation. So Yolo's going to come in now, lead us through 1 to 2 minute check-in, self-check-in, and then we're going to open up the space, and then we can continue this conversation, if that sounds good with everybody. Yep, awesome. So, but thank you, Dr. Lipscomb, Richie, Mannie, for this talk, and thank you for your perspectives. That was so powerful in the little time that we had. to speak right now. To Yolo.
Yes, thank you again to everyone for the conversation. And so, kind of building on what Dr. Lipscomb invited us to do, we're going to take a moment to just pause, right? And to check in with ourselves. So, thinking about the things that we did in the beginning, we kind of like, I encourage you to kind of find a place to feel rooted, find your breath. Things that we discussed today are not just cerebral, right? They show up in our bodies and they impact us and create a variety of different feelings and reactions. So, we're just going to take a moment wherever we are. I'll invite you to kind of take a moment. We're just going to take a moment and just kind of bring our awareness to our breath, right? And just pause together. Okay? So for me, I'm putting my hand on my center of my chest because it helps me feel my breath rise. Do whatever feels good for you. I'll take a moment and pause. I want to invite you, if you haven't and you would like to maybe take a deep breath in and out through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. Just being present, taking a moment to just feel, acknowledge all that you're feeling in this moment. I want to encourage you as you come out of this moment, as you open your eyes, as you stretch or whatever you need to do to bring yourself back to a conversation, is to whatever you felt, those feelings that you were feeling in your body, take note of those things. Be aware to maybe spend some time post this to be present with that, to check in. But this sacred pause exercise, which is really just a moment to stop, just one thing that we want to invite you, just like the feelings wheel and the other kind of things we shared. Think about, how do you pause in your day to just be with the fact that we've just shared a lot, that a lot has maybe come up, just breathe, right? As long as you need to, right? That you can, and give yourself permission to pause. Right? All right. You want next slide?
Awesome. Okay, everybody. So it's open mic time. The space is for everybody to share. If you have any questions or comments, so we ask, you can raise your hand, and we'll call on you. When you do ask your question or state your comment, we ask that you provide your name, your pronouns, and then you can provide or you can speak and ask your question or give your insight. And Yolo, if you see anything in the chat box or any hands raised, boom,
I got you.
call on her. Mm-hmm.
So Natalie shares that no questions. I just feel so encouraged by this conversation and hopeful. Thank you all so much.
Hi, my name is Jameer. I go by he, him, his are my pronouns. And I just wanted to say that what really resonated with me was when Mannie and Dr. Allen and what's my other man's name? Richie, I'm sorry. Richie, when you all stated how it was like really important for you, it was a turning point for you to actually name what was going on and allow yourself to feel emotion, and that's when you could actually start to attack what was going on and get to the bottom of it. In my own experience, I was kind of in the same boat. It was like growing up, just taught men are supposed to just handle it, really don't show too much emotion. So I think when after like that didn't work because I had like an emotional breakdown because I was trying to hold everything in. After like feeling all my emotions and stuff, that really was the turning point as well for me, because it just allowed me to feel free and be vulnerable. And I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that, and that I too experienced that.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing. Jameer, I'm curious. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Jameer.
But I'm curious. Jameer.
Yeah.
Jameer, I'm curious. You said that you were free. You are now free. So when you talk about you were free, like what does that look like to you? As opposed to when you weren't free.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? What does that feel like? What's that experience like?
Free because I felt like to be a man, I needed to be a certain way. I needed not to show emotion. So I felt trapped by that concept in my head. And it drove me, like I said, to have an emotional breakdown. So when I was able to express my emotions, it just felt so liberating because I didn't have that. I wasn't holding on to that concept anymore. I was then redefining to myself what it means to what my masculinity is, basically. So that's what I mean by it was freeing and liberating by being emotional and being able to name the emotion.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Leroy, I have a question from Nadine, who has a hand raised. Nadine, I'm going to invite you to unmute if you'd like to ask your question.
Sure. I decided to unvideo too. Multitasking mom. I just wanted to share, for me, this was really, really good. I really appreciate you guys putting this on and sharing authentically. I'm a clinician at 2 community colleges, she, her, I probably leaving some out in this moment. But at one of the 2 community colleges I work with our formerly incarcerated students. I literally belong to our formerly incarcerated student group on campus as a therapist. And I feel like this conversation was extremely necessary on so many levels. Most of our students who are formerly incarcerated tend to be Black males. I'm a therapist here in San Diego, California, so I'm not too far. That all being said, I really, really resonated with what Dr. Allen was sharing about letting Black men grieve and share feelings and emotions. And I talk about this a lot of times, but even though I'm a Black woman, one privilege I have as a Black woman in comparison to a Black male is I'm allowed a little bit more range of emotion. And what I mean by that is I feel like Black males are afforded the ability to be angry or like stone faced. Why you look like that? For me as a Black woman, I'm allowed a few more in between there. Not many more, but that's still a privilege to me, and something I always acknowledge. And so hearing that and breaking it down about not decentralizing somebody's experience and getting comfortable with that silence is something I definitely am going to take back to the team I work on. I'm the only person on the team that I work on that is not white. Well, on both teams at the 2 schools that I work at. And I think that they need to get a little bit more comfortable with silence, especially with some of the recent experiences and moving into telemental health and understanding that cultural humility is way more important than cultural competence at this time. So all that to be said, I just simply wanted to say thank you for sharing, all of you, authentically in this space. I've learned a lot, truly, even more than I've learned from my students, that I can take back to both general population and more. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. And Leroy, we also have a couple of questions I want to address there in the chat box. So I have a question from Honey to the panel. And the question is, how does it feel to share these experiences now, as opposed to a time when voices were not heard, or made an impact? Dare I say, prior to George Floyd's murder? So I'll read it one more time. The question is, how does it feel to share these experiences now as opposed to a time when voices were not heard or made an impact? Dare I say, prior to George Floyd's murder? And anybody, of course, can answer that question if would like to.
I'll start it, and then folks can chime in if I'm not touching on it. Because I've been in a space and place where I've been honoring Black male voices around their grief and loss and trauma. Narratives have been shared before this. It's just that folks are checking for it now in a different way that they weren't before George Floyd. And while it feels good that folks are ready for it, it also feels hurtful that it took for this to happen, for folks to pay attention to it. I think now, because folks are seeking it at this point, it gets out larger to more folk this time versus before. Has been my experience.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a little bit of a reframe, lovingly. Not saying that this way is wrong, but another way of thinking about it that provides a different feeling for me is I don't believe it was the murder of George Floyd that produced the moment that we're in now. I think it's the organizing of Black people that produced the moment that we're in now. The unfortunate reality is that Black people get murdered and tortured at the hands of state violence every single day, and that's been the reality since they invented police and prisons to cage us in 1865. But what happened differently this time is that Black folks who've been fighting state violence for generations, we just hit that wave, and there were so many things I think that lined up. COVID, people being at home, people kind of seeing through the American myth in a new way due to COVID, and many of us struggling while billionaires became richer than ever during COVID. I think it had to do with the Trump presidency. So much of the American myth has been demystified, and I think at this point, when that particular murder, it was caught on tape, as many are, even our organizing just hit that much harder. Shout out to Black Visions Collective in Minnesota and all the folks who did work around that, and who are still in the streets and still doing this work. So with that, when I reframe it that way, these experiences, sharing them is always difficult emotionally, but I'm actually encouraged in this moment because Black organizing is working. And it's been working, and we're all here because of it. But I feel like Black organizing is working more than ever. And organizations like Beam, organizations like Success Stories, I think we're taken a little more seriously. We've been doing this work, right? Beam been here, Success Stories been here. Many of the organizations for people on this call, we didn't start this work in May, right? We've been doing this work for a long time. And now it seems like the world is like, oh, I don't know about y'all, but a lot of people who I've known for years, and now all of a sudden they want to put me in their story and be like, my high school friend, Richie, has been talking about this forever. And I'm so excited to be, and it's like, it's cool, but I'm glad that we're finally, what we've been saying is being seen as legitimate, right? Because we have been fighting for this long and we hit that wave. So from that perspective, I'm encouraged. It's always difficult kind of at a singular level to talk about these things, but I'm encouraged because I know people are listening in a new way, and we've hit a wave and we're gonna ride this out to victory.
Thank you, Richie, for sharing that. I see some of the questions I want to read out too. So I have Bonnie says, what was it about feminism specifically that led to your emotional transformations? And open that up, of course, to anyone.
Yeah, I'd love to start with that. I think that feminism, Black feminism in particular, the feminism of bell hooks, speaks about the ways that men are repressed by patriarchy. I think it's important to point out men are not oppressed by patriarchy, but we are repressed by patriarchy. And that therefore that we do have a stake in our own freedom to dismantle it and to dismantle it within ourselves. And for me, reading the words, again, I'll say the name of the book, We Real Cool by Bell Hooks. It was just so clear she was talking about me. And that to be a full emotional human being, when I stopped trying to be a real man, I got to be the real me. And that was the most freeing experience of my life.
Thank you. I'm typing in the I'm typing in the title of the book for everybody as well. So if you want to read that too, We Were Cool by Bell Hooks. I'm putting that in there. Another question, and if somebody else want to answer that question, I'm sorry, anyone wants to answer that question before I read any more? Mannie or Alan? Okay. There was one more question. Oh, did I miss it? Oh, no, I thought it was one of the questions. I'm sorry. No more questions in the chat box. Let me see if anybody raised their hand or had any other questions.
John Steen?
Yep, I see John. I'm going to unmute you, John. You want to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. Just want to express gratitude to all the participants that shared so vulnerably and so powerfully. There was a mention, I think it was when Mannie Thomas, when you were speaking about art in a way that art was something that helped you to, I guess, find your way back to yourself and towards your liberation. I'm wondering, just from you and from anybody else on the panel, if there are ways that with our repressed forms of expression, if art and creativity is something as a practice of yours that you see being a valuable part of this movement towards liberation.
So, yes, unequivocally, yes. So, for my personal experience, right, one of the first things before, you know, before discovering bell hooks, before discovering like the idea of feminism and how it can help me overcome like the toxic beliefs that I had, right? Before that, the way that I got to my feelings was through writing. So, and then what I began to realize, I was willing and able to write things that I couldn't possibly say to another individual, right? Or maybe that I was unwilling, right? Then I was writing things that I weren't even aware there were things that I was feeling and thinking were problems, right? So that was victorious of it in of itself, because it was a relief, right? And that can be done in a multitude of ways. Like it can also be done through drawing, right? It can be done through meditation. Again, that's why, you know, when we talk about healing through connection, art, and movement, and creating better, you know, creating something better. So yes. And then I'll say this quickly too. Although writing something down was life-giving to me, when I had the courage then to share it and realize that there were many, many other people that were feeling the same things, and the freedom that brought us gave me even more. So when we talk about like how important, like I remember when they were getting rid of like art in schools, right? Because of a funding issue or whatever, right? And how my heart broke for them, because there are people who can express themselves in other ways. And we know what happens. Like we can sit there and say all day, like, well, we don't know what the future holds, right? We know what it holds when people can't express themselves. Like that is not something that we don't know. When people are left in spaces where they have no outlooks, harm is then done. So for me, when we talk about art and healing, I think they go hand in hand. It's a vessel and it's a tool in which we use to, one, communicate a better message. Because some of the toxic stuff, most of the toxic things that we were given was done through art, right? Like if we look at some of the music that we listen to, movies that we were given, and the heroes that were given in those movies, right? Like that was given into us in an art form. And I believe we can heal and change the narrative in the same way. And we must use the same mediums to bring healing and love and connection to people who have been given harm, isolation, and trauma. We can use it to do the same thing.
I think to add to that, the neurobiology piece is that when you engage in arts and creative expression, dance, poetry, etc., you tap into the right side of the brain. And so that allows for you to tap into the emotion that maybe consciously, when you're logically thinking about stuff, it's not readily available. And so definitely, like Mannie was saying, I highly promote, and that's what I encourage in healing spaces when I'm working in partnership with Black men and youth, to engage into that side of their brain, to do some creative expression through art, singing, dance, etc., writing.
If I could just quickly
oh, you go, Rich, you go for it.
Okay. Yeah, if I could just quickly speak to that as a producer, I think I'd love to just think about that term healing as like zoomed out from like a cultural healing perspective. We, much like Mannie was saying, like we were given the story, someone's gonna tell stories about Black people. Someone's gonna tell stories about Black masculinity. And culturally, those things can harm us or they can heal us. And I think it's particularly healing to make art, to make visible art around the multiple facets of Black masculinity. There's something healing in and of that itself. I think there's something healing about that in and of itself. Like I think about the film Moonlight, which is just a beautiful film about a Black boyhood growing into Black manhood. I think of even, and although I have other critiques for this person's art, I think of Jay-Z's album 444, which was like the first time I heard a hip hop album with men really showing emotional vulnerability. That's the kind of art that I seek to create, because I think we need to culturally heal too. Because if we're healing as individuals, but the dominant narrative is Black men are all hetero, Black men are all cis, Black men are all violent, Black men are all emotionless, then I can be doing my personal healing, but the next generation is being damaged by the same narratives that I was. So I also just want to point out that part, that art can be culturally healing to us as a people as well.
So good. See another question from Natalie. I'm gonna actually unmute yourself. Can you share? Yeah.
So I'm wondering what are.
Well, Natalie, we can't hear you that well.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I had my speaker on because I was trying to listen to y'all loud. That's how I like my truth, loud. So I'm wondering, and I'm curious about what are postures specifically from Black women that have been helpful in your healing journey, ways that we have shown up for you, or things that maybe we have said, or what has been helpful in your healing process. Oftentimes I think between folks showing up as feminine and masculine Black folks, there can be strain there. And so I'm wondering what has been helpful to you, and what are things that will continue to be helpful, if anybody can speak to that.
I feel like, hi Natalie, I appreciate you deeply, always. I feel like we want to be very careful here. I want to be very careful here. I don't want to answer a question in a way that makes it seem like we as men who are put in a position of privilege over women in patriarchy are saying, you need to show up like this and then we would heal better, right? Especially in lieu of the conversation earlier about how so much of our unhealedness then translates into harm and violence against Black women. I also want to say, and I promise I'm not just saying this for like snaps and to like be a stan, but there's something very healing about Black feminine energy in and of itself. So the only thing that I would say has been really helpful to me with acknowledging, I'm not trying to tell anybody to be one way or the other, but just the presence of Black women in my life has been a healing experience. And I think that a way, I would say all Black women, Black feminine people need to do is be present, but Black feminine people do that anyway. It's just in the culture of Black femininity to really hold down and be present for all Black people. And I actually think a question, if I could reframe a little bit, is like, I would love for us as Black masculine people to be asking ourselves, what work do we need to do so that we can fully receive the energies of Black people who aren't masculine in a way that is not harmful, right? Because oftentimes Black women are down to ride for Black men at the drop of a hat. Black genderqueer people are in the streets when Black men get killed, right? Are Black men in the streets in the same way when Black genderqueer people are being killed, or when Black cis women or trans women are being killed? It's not the same. So I feel like y'all have already been such a healing presence in our lives, whether it be the Black women that were raised around or by or in relationship with in various ways. And I think that a question I like to ask myself is, what healing do I need to do so I can best receive your energy rather than the other way around?
Thank you for that.
With all the things that he just said, so I can kind of bring the two together. So like earlier, the question was like, what specifically about being, feminist work was most transforming to me, and then how we should. So like when I began to realize like being a feminist is advocating for the rights of for the rights of women, for equality outside of gender, right? Like, what was so amazing was the example that is already being set for us, I think was what was being helpful to me. So when I was at a part in when I had reached a part in my life to where I was looking for the people who demonstrated the most resolve and did it in an honorable way, the people that were coming to mind were women, right? Like each and every time I was just like, oh, so that example and that resolve and that strength and that dignity, right? Not to say that weren't men who were doing it, but it was women most of the time that were showing up in that way. And I was just like, okay, now that I want to see everybody in that light, right? Like now that I want to love in that way, right? Now that I want to have integrity in that way, in that I'm being the same person everywhere, right? In that I want to be free in that way, right? Because when I'm looking at it, like it's not, everything that I went through because of the system as a young Black male, a young Black female still had it worse, right? Because again, there's that transference, right? Everything that I'm going through, if they're dealing with me, they're getting as well, right? And then they just have the added on pressure that they're a woman and they're going through all the same things. So when I see them have that resolve, right? Like that encouraged me in a way, and it showed up for me in a way that pushed me to be like, okay, you can do this, right? And if everybody is supposed to be seen with that type of equality, right? Like I can then show up in that way too, regardless of what has happened to me, because it Black women were showing up for me in that way, regardless how they had been hurt and abused and trampled by the system, right? So it just encouraged that I could do the same thing. So, not to say that was their responsibility.
I have one person that has, thank you so much for your responses. Leroy, I want to name this one question who's been asking like questions for a minute, and I want to make sure I get to that person. Okay. Vance, do you want to unmute and share one of your questions that you have before we close up?
Yes, thank you. Can you see? Hopefully you can see me too. Yeah, so we're gonna start with one, and then if there's time or space, then I'll do the other ones. But okay, well, first of all, actually, now that you've given me this time and space, let me just thank you, Yolo, for this, because this is my first time on a call with Beam or with you, or like, pretty much anything like this. And this was great. So like the conversation that we all just partook in, like, is all from you in the space that you created in the beginning, and setting the boundaries and setting the guidelines and all of that. So just thank you for that. Thank you, panelists, for coming, for sharing, for I heard so much of my life and my story in what you all shared, and it's like very overwhelming when you hear your experience validated so much. So thank you for that, and thank you for everyone that had their own comments and questions as well. So okay, so Richie, you mentioned the bell hooks. We were real cool. I'm wondering, what are some other authors or filmmakers or artists that any of you have read or studied or just been entertained by that helped you reimagine Black masculinity, that helped people reimagine Black masculinity? And then in particular, if you have any for like youth as well, like ages like 11 to 18, that would also be great. So adults and adults. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vance. I'll go quick, and I think maybe we can follow up. I'd love to give like an exhaustive list that we can send over that can be shared, but I'll answer the specific 11 to 18 piece really quickly. Okay. I think it's really important that we're connecting youth with all the dope rap music that's coming out that is not patriarchal. People hear rap, people hear trap, and they assume that it's all being made by cis men, kind of flaunting patriarchal power. And today that is just not the case. There's so many dope rappers who are not cis men. There's dope rappers that are cis men. There's so many rappers that aren't. Yeah. So I think of rappers like Chica. I think of rappers like Meg Thee Stallion. I think of rappers like Killer Cakes, who is a Black man but is outwardly queer and makes dope music. I think of Big Freedia. Like I'm gonna leave it with those so other people.
It's like, that's good. Yeah.
Literally rappers that you could play for kids and they can grow up with a different story.
Okay, thank you.
They're cussing and stuff. When I say kids, it depends on what your morals are. I'm just saying, like, it's not patriarchal, is what.
Right. No, perfect. This is great. Yeah, good. Okay. Meg Thee Stallion. Okay.
Awesome. Leroy, I think I'm looking at the time and being mindful of people's time commitment. I think we are now at 6:01. I'm just going to name that.
Right. No, so thank you all so much. Shout out to the panelists. Thank you again so much for your perspective. I feel like we definitely need a part 2. Or we need to continue this conversation. So just thank you, panelists, for all your perspectives. Thank you, everyone who shared comments. Just again, check in with yourself. Check in with your emotions, what you're feeling. I have a question. We will send out the information from the panelists where you can follow them, follow their Instagrams, follow the work that they're doing, along with those resources. We will definitely do that. Writing for resistance, we have this writing prompt here. We'll send this out in the email. This is just for you to tap into those emotions, for you to process, to write a form of expression, a form of art. We'll be sure to check this out, and you can use this if you ever do need to process. We'd just like to hear, from the panelists, a one-word takeaway before we close out. One word that you're taking away from this experience, or what you're feeling right now. And in the audience, please feel free to share your one word as well.
My one word is always love. Love, love, love.
Mine is energized, feeling energized.
I would say mine is I think you offered an opportunity here for Black masculine folks to be more whole, and for our Black people to be get a whole picture of this Black people.
I'm gonna go with humility. Thank you guys so much for your time. It means a lot.
Thank you. I feel warm. I feel love. It's so warming to be in a space of connection and empathy and support. I hear honored, connected, seen, affirmed, calling or called. Yeah. want to upload, I want to hold those, name those, honor all those expressions, all those feelings, and appreciate all those takeaways. So after this, we're going to send out a survey for you to give us feedback on how this went for you. It's crucial that you provide and share your feedback to us. This will take like 5 minutes tops. We want to hear what went well, what resonated with you, what we can do even better. Here's some different resources. Again, we'll send a link and we'll send all these out to you. These are some different resources to help you talk, help you process, help you cope. We have some common coping strategies as well. Join the work. So Beam is expanding, especially if you felt moved by Black Masculinity Reimagined. We have our leadership committee application open, so there's a great opportunity for you to be more involved in the work that we do. Again, we'll send all that out. And, next week we have the kickback. This is just a space for Black masculine men and Black masculine folks to come together, build community. We talk about life, culture, wellness, whatever it is that you're feeling. We'll do some emotional check-in in. It's a great space, so please be sure to attend our next workshop. And here's our sign-up. Be part of our listserv so you can get more information about what it is that we're doing. And if you'd like to support our work, you can go to being.community/donation to support. Thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists. I just feel so inspired. Thank you all for your perspective, for your conversation. Yolo and I, we're going to stick around for a little bit to talk if anyone has any last second questions. But again, thank you all so much and have a great evening.
Thank y'all. Oh, one thing I would say too is this is on Facebook Live, so it's going to be on our Facebook page. So if you want to share the video with people to continue the conversation, send it to a folk or someone you think that might really benefit from watching this. You can also share that as well, okay?
Sure.
Thanks to you all.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Hey, Adeline. Thank you, Paris. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Dr. Allen. I'm calling you Dr. Allen.
Thanks all be to you. You are everything, Yolo.
Thank you.
I'm with Leroy. I need to take you on the road. Like, I need to record that first 45 minutes and listen to it daily. Like, that gave me everything in life. Yolo, you are a true gift.
I feel the same about everybody. I learned so. It was nice to really just hear you all echo, mirror, share. I was just like, wow, this is really. It just felt really good because so often it's like and it's just different to hear different folks' voices. You know what I mean? And hear people say it in the way you did, and I was like, yes, I also need to hear these things too. Like, you know what I mean? So
for sure.
I deeply appreciated you all.
Sure, it was wonderful. Powerful. Thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out, Leroy.
Oh, so Dr. Allen, so don't act like we ain't gonna pull you back in. You know you about to be like getting an email.
I'm here for it. You had me when you were centering and calling into the space. I was like, this is everything. Like, where have you been all my life? Like, I need this for every space that I go into, so people know how to hold space for me. Like, I need folks to hear this. It's everything. Yeah, I'm about it.
Okay.
And I'm going to be sending you all an email because myself and one of my colleagues, we do a podcast, and I would love for you to talk about being and all that you all do.
Cool. We would love to.
So that's coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
For sure. We here for
sure.
it.
Well, I'm gonna jump off, Leroy. I know you might stay on a little longer. I'm gonna jump off so I can come down a little bit.
That part.
For sure. Yeah, I think I gotta run as well.
Okay.
I gotta run as well, YOLO. But really quick, what's our Facebook name? I feel bad. I should know this, but I don't know it off top. Like underscore beam or
If you
just
look at our website, you'll find out. You can find a Facebook link, but it's just Black Emotional Mental Health Collective. It's just like spelled out. So if you go on Facebook, I'm going to share the video to there. Share the video because I'm sending the video to my brother and a lot of people. I'm like, hey, look, you watch it.
Yes.
right.
All
You
of
guys
that.
know I got a lot of people who are going to get that work today from that video. Professional, but yeah. So I
Awesome. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. Much gratitude. Y'all have a great evening. Take
You
care.
too. Be well. Be
Thank
safe.
you,
Stay
you
healthy,
too.
y'all. Till next time.
Thank you.